There's a particular kind of person you've probably encountered at some point in your life. They're magnetic in a quiet way. They remember things, small things, the name of your childhood dog, the offhand comment you made 3 weeks ago that you'd already forgotten. They show up for people. They read the room before anyone else has even found their seat. Being around them feels like being genuinely known, and yet, if you ever tried to move closer, really closer, you'd hit something. Not hostility. Not coldness. Just a kind of invisible ceiling. A place where depth simply stops. And you'd walk away wondering if it was something you said, or something you did, or whether the warmth you felt was ever entirely real. People who carry chronic distrust don't look the way we imagine them. We picture the suspicious loner. The person who assumes everyone is lying, who moves through life with their arms crossed and their eyes narrowed. And yes, that version exists. But the far more common version, the psychologically accurate version, looks nothing like that. It looks like someone who is remarkably, almost professionally good at connection on the surface. Someone who gives generously, adapts fluidly, makes other people feel heard and valued, while running a quiet, invisible operation underneath it all, making sure no one ever gets close enough to become a threat. It's not manipulation. It's architecture. And it took years to build. Here's what most people misunderstand about trust. Trust is not a personality trait. It's not something you're simply born with or without, some genetic dial set it open or closed. Trust is a conclusion. A conclusion your nervous system quietly arrives at, often before you're old enough to form a single conscious memory, based entirely on the evidence available to it at the time. The developmental research on early attachment tells us something fundamental about how this works. The caregiving relationships of early childhood don't just shape us emotionally, they function as a kind of neural blueprint. A working model the brain constructs in response to one central, urgent question: is it safe to depend on other people? That question gets answered early. And once the nervous system has its answer, it doesn't abandon it easily. It defends it, so when someone grows up in an environment where the people who were supposed to be safe, weren't. Where care was inconsistent. Where love had conditions that kept shifting without explanation. Where the very person you ran to in distress was also. Sometimes, the source of it, the brain doesn't simply conclude that those particular people were unsafe, it draws a broader conclusion. A sweeping one: people, as a category, are unsafe, and that conclusion gets packed up and carried forward. Into every new friendship. Into every relationship. Into every moment where someone gets just close enough that the old information starts flaring back to life, what it actually feels like to live inside that framework, and I want you to really consider this, is a permanent, exhausting negotiation, between what you want and what you believe is possible, because people who don't trust anyone almost universally still want connection. The need doesn't vanish. The capacity for love doesn't hollow out. What diminishes is the belief that letting someone fully in is something you can survive, so you meet someone you genuinely like. There's a moment, brief, almost electric, of real hope. If you've lived this experience, you'll recognize it immediately. And then, almost before the warmth has settled, something else activates. The brain has run this scenario before. It thinks it already knows how the story ends. So it starts searching. Scanning for the inconsistency. The small contradiction. The moment this person finally reveals who they actually are, and the cruelest part of all of this is that the scanning itself, the vigilance, creates exactly the distance it was designed to prevent. To the other person, it can look like disinterest. Like you've pulled back. Like you don't care. When the truth is almost precisely the opposite, there's a specific psychological framework that helps explain why distrust can cut so deep, particularly when it traces back to someone who should have been a source of safety. When the person who causes harm is also the person you fundamentally depend on, the mind faces an impossible problem. Fully registering what's happening, really seeing it, would mean acknowledging that your primary source of protection is also your primary source of danger. For a child, that level of awareness is genuinely destabilizing. The attachment itself is too critical to survival, so the mind does something remarkable and terrible in equal measure. It learns to not know what it knows. It buries the awareness. It explains away what it cannot afford to hold directly. Repeat that long enough, and the mechanism turns inward. You stop trusting your own perception, not just other people, yourself. Am I reading this wrong? Am I making too much of it? Am I the problem here? People who spent their formative years having their experiences consistently minimized or dismissed, told they were imagining things, being dramatic, too sensitive, often grow into adults with a particularly painful paradox at their center. They read other people with near unsettling precision. They pick up on micro-expressions and shifts in tone that most people miss entirely. And then, in the same breath, they immediately doubt every single thing they just perceived. That's not a flaw in character. That's what happens when someone's internal compass gets systematically disrupted over a long enough period of time. The behavioral patterns that emerge from all of this tend to branch in several directions. Some people move toward avoidance. They keep relationships deliberately light. They're skilled at being present without being vulnerable, warm at a fixed distance. They're the ones who grow suddenly strange when things start deepening, who find reasons to step back right at the moment when intimacy is peaking. Others go in the opposite direction entirely, pulling people extremely close, monitoring constantly, needing proximity as a substitute for the certainty they can't find, and then there are those who oscillate between both. Drawing someone in, then panicking at the closeness, then pulling away. Then being quietly devastated when that person eventually gives up and leaves. From the outside, it can resemble a kind of emotional inconsistency, even, to some, a game. But from the inside, it doesn't feel like strategy. It feels like being caught between two forces that are both trying to protect you and both tearing you apart. Here is what I think matters most about people who carry this particular kind of history. When they do let someone in, when they decide, against every instinct and every piece of old evidence, that someone is worth the risk, the loyalty that follows is extraordinary. Fierce. Unconditional in a way that most people never experience on either end of a relationship. Because that decision, to trust, for someone who has spent years building sophisticated reasons not to, is not casual. It's not made lightly or impulsively. It's made in full awareness of what has happened before. And when they make it, they bring everything they have, which is also why the loss is hit with a force that is difficult to explain to someone who hasn't been there. Because it was never just this relationship. It was the entire argument they made to themselves, quietly, carefully, over a long time, that this time could be different. Rebuilding trust, real trust, not just the appearance of it, is slow, slower than anyone involved wants it to be. It doesn't happen because someone makes a promise. Promises carry relatively little weight for a nervous system calibrated around the expectation of betrayal. What actually moves the needle is something different, the gradual accumulation of evidence that contradicts the old conclusion. What that looks like in practice is less dramatic than people imagine. It's someone showing up the same way on an unremarkable Tuesday as they did when they were first trying to make an impression. It's the pattern of small, consistent, thoroughly unspectacular moments of reliability, repeated enough times that the brain begins, slowly, reluctantly, to file them differently. It isn't a grand gesture. It's just a person being exactly who they said they were. Again and again and again, until the nervous system, almost against its own will, begins to revise its conclusion, and even then, slowly is the operative word. Healing from chronic distrust doesn't move in a straight line. There are periods of real openness, followed by sudden withdrawal that can look, from the outside, like a step backward. When that happens, it isn't regression. It's the old framework encountering new weight, testing whether it can hold. It's the architecture deciding whether to expand. If you're watching this and something in it is landing in a way that feels less like intellectual interest and more like recognition, the specific, slightly uncomfortable sensation of being accurately described, then I want to leave you with something. The way you love underneath all the protection is not diminished by the protection. The capacity for connection you have maintained, in spite of everything that taught you connection was dangerous, that is not a small thing. You built something remarkable in order to survive. And you did survive. What comes next is slower, stranger work, figuring out, one careful piece at a time, which parts of the architecture you genuinely still need, and which parts you might finally be safe enough to set down. If this video resonated with you, consider sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. Subscribe to Scienceit Daily and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new video. And if you'd like to support the channel and keep this kind of content going, the join button is right below. Thank you, genuinely, for watching.